So this video is about biological classification, and as you can see, the opening photo is one of a cutlery drawer, and you can see here that we've got three different types of spoons. They're organised based on their size and their shape and their utility, and they're set in separate compartments. We've done the same thing with the knives, and then also the forks are separate as well. So basically they've been classified or organised based on their use. Why would we do that? Well, it's to make it easy to find things, to be able to access things. So classification is not just a biological function, and it's also not just something that humans do. All organisms would classify things in their environment based on whether they can eat it, or whether it's going to kill them, or whether they can mate with it, or whether it's going to help them with their survival. So classification is super important, and it's just a way of us being able to organise things. Let's see what the syllabus says. There's a few things here. Firstly, we need to be able to recognise that biological classification can be hierarchical and based on different levels of similarity. And these are related to physical features, methods of reproduction, and molecular sequences. So we'll break those down, but we're going to focus primarily on what is classification and what we mean by hierarchical. So what is classification? It's a way of arranging things into groups according to their similarity. Now, really importantly, classification is directly related to the purpose for which the data will be used. So now, to think about biological classification, well, biologists classify things for lots of different reasons. One of the initial things that we did as humans was we would classify things based on their use. So looking at different berries, for example, could we eat them? Are they food or are they poisonous? But also looking at other plants and animals and looking at, well, how can we actually use them? So the original human form of classification was based on utility. But also, now from a scientific point of view, we would use a classification system when we're looking at monitoring and conserving ecosystems. We would be wanting to classify things based on their trophic levels. So in other words, are they producers? Are they consumers? Where are they in the trophic levels? What ecological services do they provide to the ecosystem? Are they filter feeders? Are they predators, etc.? And also we can classify the ecosystems as well. Is it a desert? Is it a rainforest, etc.? So that's all types of classification. And the way that we will classify things is based on what we want to use the data for. In agriculture, agricultural scientists and farmers would be classifying organisms based on their characteristics, their desired characteristics for being able to tolerate rain or tolerate drought or tolerate pest infestations, etc. We also might be classifying organisms based on medical research. For example, are they vectors that transmit disease? And also we have ways of classifying things, organisms, to be able to understand them better, to be able to research them, but also to be able to communicate. So we want to be able to communicate, if we're communicating scientifically about an organism or a species, we need to make sure that the reader is thinking about that same species. That's why it's important to be very, very organised, particularly because there's so many species on Earth. It's really important to be organised. Now, the next concept was the fact that the classification is hierarchical. So that means basically we're grouping from larger, more general groups to detailed, specific groups. General to specific. And it's based on their level of similarity. So these large groups share similarities. Okay, and then as we go down to more specific groups, they have differences from others. So the syllabus objective are. So the next syllabus objective is to describe the classification system for similarities of physical features, or the Linnaean system. So where do we get the name Linnaean from? From Carl Linnaeus, who lived 300 or so years ago, and he developed a classification system that we still use today. It wasn't just about structural features. For plants, he looked at reproductive structures, and for animals, he looked at physical characteristics. But what he did is he arranged a hierarchy, a hierarchical series of groups, and each of these groups he called a taxon, or collectively taxa. So taxonomy then is the science of naming and classifying things, and each of the levels we call a taxon. Multiply, they're called taxa. So this is the Linnaean classification system, and this is an example here as well. So look, Linnaeus didn't come up with the idea of domain. He started with kingdom. So he had kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. What's in bold here is the names of each of the taxa. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I'm going to put in here, if I can work it out, a link to an awesome video that I absolutely love called the classification wrap. That's going to help you remember this. Now, I want you to see that it goes from general to very, very specific. So species means specific. Now, we've got this level called domain, which sits above, it's the highest level, and there's 3 domains. Eukarya, which is the eukaryotes. As you know, that's organisms with cells that contain a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. But there's also 2 other domains, and these are domains of prokaryotes. One is called bacteria, and the other one is called archaea. So, you know, they're both essentially, or archaebacteria, so they're both essentially prokaryotic. You might think that they're bacteria, but the reason they're a separate domain is because eukarya are different from bacteria as they are from eukarya. So they're really 3 distinct domains. Now, this one here, this example, we're taking it through to a type of bear, and I want you to see that we're going from very general to very specific. So right at the top here, we've got eukarya as the domain. So all organisms that are eukaryotic, that have cells with membrane-bound organelles and nuclei, are in this domain. Then, if we step down to the next one, kingdom, we've got the animal kingdom, we've got the plant kingdom, fungi, and protists. So at this level, this is really quite fundamental. We're looking at differences in cell structure. So if we think about the domain eukarya, we're talking about really incredibly fundamental differences with the cell structure. So bacteria and archaea, they don't have nuclei or membrane-bound organelles, whereas the eukarya do. So these are really fundamental. But then if we look down at this next level with the kingdom, so here's the animal kingdom. So the different kingdoms, we've got animal, plant, fungi, and protists. So these are really fundamental as well, because again, they've got really quite significant cellular differences. For example, animals don't have a cell wall. Plants and fungi have cell walls, but made of different things. Animals don't have chloroplasts. Plants have chloroplasts. Fungi don't have chloroplasts. So there's quite significant differences here at the cellular level. So now if we step down and we're getting more specific, this is the level we call phylum, and the example we're talking about is chordata. Basically, chordata means they've got a dorsal nerve cord, or in other words, essentially, we're talking about they have a spinal cord and, you know, a spinal column, vertebral column, a backbone, if you like. So before we have a look at that other phylum, this is not all of them, but we've got the arthropoda. So arthropods have an exoskeleton. You know, they have a segmented body. Mollusks, these are like things like barnacles. They are snails. They are octopus. So they have a soft body. They don't have a spinal cord. They don't have bones, etc. So you can see at a body organization level, there's some really significant differences at this phylum level. So if we have a look at the different classes of chordata, we've got mammals, birds, fish, reptiles, amphibians. So what's different about those? Well, there's differences in terms of what covers their body, you know, so fur versus feathers versus scales. There's also some differences in terms of whether they're warm-blooded or cold-blooded. Now if we get down to order, so now we're looking at the order Carnivora. So they're meat eaters, but we've also got others, and this is not extensive, this is not the whole list, but we've got rodents, we've got primates. So more, I guess more specific again, less organisms in this. And then as we go down further, family, genus, species, we're getting very, very specialized. So down here, we're looking at differences in size of the body, differences in the color of the fur, if you like, maybe, and differences in maybe where they live. But other than that, there's not very many differences. So in a nutshell, at the highest level, we're talking about differences in the cell structure. In the middle, we're talking about, differences in their body organization, and their coverings of the body. And then down as we go lower, we're talking about things like differences in their teeth, differences in the color of their fur, differences in size, and differences in where they live. Okay, so here's a really good question that was in one of the external exams. So I want you to take time to have a read of this question, and then I'm going to show you the model answer. So having a look at this question then, so we're talking about the Linnaean system of classification. The features used to classify living things change according to taxonomic levels. So you need to remember that the taxons are the levels: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And so describe using relevant examples how these features change. So you need to be talking about how they go from general to specific. And you need to provide examples of how these features change through the classification system. So here's the model answer. At the kingdom level, it's the widest variety of organisms, and the differences are things like cell type, so prokaryote, eukaryote, and cell structure, cell wall, chloroplast, etc. The middle taxa, they're becoming more specific, and there's minor shared similarities such as body covering, body shape, and of course leaf shape, etc. At the species level, we have features such as teeth structure, body size, behavior, and distribution, as well as biochemical similarities. So that's worth 4 marks there. Now, there was another point there. It's not a syllabus objective, but it's in the syllabus, and it was a note to say that students should recognise that the Linnaean system does not rely solely on physical features for classification. It also considers the reproductive characteristics. Specifically, Linnaeus looked at specifically at plants in terms of the reproductive characteristics. But the system also considers ecological roles, behavioural traits, etc. I want you to understand that we still use Linnaean classification system now. The kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. We still use. However, now with modern science, modern techniques like molecular sequencing, we've got a lot more information, so we're able to use that same classification system, but it's not focused specifically on physical features anymore. Now, a couple more things that came out of Linnaeus. One that's really important is called binomial nomenclature, the 2-name system that we use to name species. We use the genus name and the species name. For example, Homo sapiens. There's a couple of things that are important. The genus name is with a capital first letter, species name with a lowercase first letter. When typing, both the genus and species name are written italics, and when you handwrite them, you need to underline it. You can also do abbreviations as well. First time, you need to write the genus and species name in full. Then after that, you can use a shorthand, so you just use the first letter of the genus and then the full species name. That's the appropriate way to abbreviate.